I thoroughly enjoyed Palworld. I think MRSSTIX and I clocked in approximately 100-ish hours before completing the game. Palworld was also simultaneously one of two different games this year that I know life, the other being Wuthering Waves. So seeing Spherix, which is a game that has very definitely taken significant inspiration from Palworld and Pokemon, announced they were working on a very similar title, left me excited. Especially given this was supposedly an MMO. According to their Steam page, Spherix combines creature collection with thrilling real-time action combat in a vibrant multiplayer online open world. Players will be able to capture, battle, evolve, and customize your Spherix. We'll be able to explore dungeons, complete quests, unveil mysteries, and build the most powerful team, which sounds like it could potentially be a lot of fun. There's a new style of MMO emerging lately. It's a style of MMO with a reduced focus on the massively multiplayer aspect of the game, but a larger focus instead on the single player aspect, focusing on content that can be done alone or in smaller groups rather than larger ones. But that doesn't necessarily detract from the massively aspect, since that potential is still very much so there. So many MMOs, Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, are opting for more single player experiences because the genre is shifting towards that demographic of player, so it makes sense. These tend to feature less of the arduous grind that is found in MMOs, and they're often more fun. It's why survival games like Valheim, like V Rising, Palworld all became such monolithic hits. They took what made MMORPGs fun and then proceeded to reduce their scale. Spherix is going to feature full real-time action combat. While it seems as though the game itself is going to allow for players to freely run around the world from a third-person perspective, it looks as though combat is going to feature a different format altogether, where games like Pokemon and Temtem feature instance battles where players load into a battle screen and then engage in turn-based combat, merely selecting from one of 4 different abilities. Spherix is going to allow for you to actively engage in combat directly, but at the same time from a top-down isometric perspective. You'll be able to move, reposition, use abilities, react reflexively, and coordinate takedowns with other players to ensure your victory in encounters. PvP has been confirmed as a feature, which means you'll be able to engage other players, confirmed to take place both out in the open world or in dedicated arenas. What is unconfirmed at present is whether PvP is going to be 1v1, 2v2, 5v5, the scale has yet to be documented, but also whether the PvP is going to be optional, at least with regards to the open world PvP. I'd assume, given the direction of the combat, which seems to take place in large segregated areas separate from the rest of the world, this would be the case, and players would be required to agree to PvP requests, to like duel requests, but more clarification on that would be great. Before we delve any deeper into Spherix, however, allow me to thank my incredible patrons over on Patreon. Your guys' support is why I can continue to make videos like this every single month, and I deeply appreciate you all being there for me. Spherix themselves are creatures that you'll find out in the world and capture, much like Pokemon or Pals. They feature their own distinct element, role, abilities. Sadly, they didn't elaborate on what roles were specifically. Tank, support, DPS as examples, but I'd wager a guess that that is what they meant. You'll be able to hold up to 4 Spherix at any given time, meaning during battles you'll be capable of switching between 4 different units. Thus, team composition will take a pivotal role, elemental synergy, role synergy, making sure you at least have a tank, probably a support or healer, and finally a Spherix that can essentially nuke enemies. I think it'll be interesting seeing how multiplayer is going to factor into this. What if 5 different players party up? Will all 5 players be able to deploy 4 Spherix each? Dungeons are confirmed, so will larger groups detract from that difficulty? Will it trivialize dungeon bosses? Is there a limit on how many players can be in a group together? 4? 6? What about world bosses? There are a lot of questions, and definitely not enough answers right now concerning how content is going to be consumed. Spherix are combat creatures, which you'll be able to level up, evolve, and fuse with other Spherix to unlock new abilities, new perks, expanding your range of build options. This functions kind of like breeding. When you breed together in Pokemon or Palworld, the offspring have a chance to inherit abilities or traits from the parents. They also confirmed a Spherix gearing system will be present, allowing you to power up your Spherix by equipping them with a variety of different items that boost their attributes, with the option of enhancing gear, which is always fun, especially if the enhancement is tied to RNG. I totally still don't have PTSD from BDO's enhancement system. No, not at all. Spherix features a large open world to seamlessly explore. There are no loading screens whatsoever, allowing players to coexist together in a single shared world, likely split between multiple different servers. The world will be populated with quests that you can take and complete events, no elaboration on what the events are actually going to entail, whether they're dynamic events that spawn periodically out in the world, or instead feature a preset time. You'll be able to collect resources, likely used for enhancing gear, and solve puzzles. Concerning the multiplayer aspect, since that's where the M in MMO comes from, well, one of the M's anyway. According to the Steam page, you'll be able to change the course of your journey with other players, where cooperation, competition, and community will shape your experience. It's refreshing to hear that cooperation will be a central focus of the game. I'm all for pursuing content as a solo player. I have been playing MMOs since roughly 2004, and I've been relatively fond of tackling the vast majority of content on my own, seeing how far I can get without really relying on other people. But at the same time, that's a little bit difficult to achieve, given a central part of doing MMOs is the dungeons and the raid aspects, and also PvP. What this means is that active participation is typically warranted, is typically required from other players. I'm sure the competition here refers to the PvP aspect. One of the most important aspects of an MMO is its community. If your community is dead, so is your game. A community, a sense of belonging, even in games with a small but dedicated player base, is, I believe, to be imperative to its continued survival. This has never been more evident than when you go back and look at old MMOs that are decades old, that still exist, that are still online, that are still updating, like Mabinogi, like Dragon Nest, like MapleSword. A good core community not only brings new players in, not only remains welcoming to new players, but it also keeps old players around. Dungeons have been confirmed to take two different forms. On the one hand, there are going to be dungeons that tie into the story, allowing players to unveil the echoes of the past, being entirely handcrafted. And then we'll have randomly generated dungeons with unique events, monsters, bosses, and loot, allowing players to repeatedly run them without the tedious or repetitious nature rerunning the same dungeons typically brings. I think this is probably going to function similar to Palworld once again. MRSSTIX and I repeatedly ran dungeons while leveling, while trying to fill out the remainder of our pals. And I'm curious if they plan on implementing randomly generated dungeons in more or less the same way. There are a few features that the devs are currently working towards implementing: ranked PvP seasons, solo and pre-made group queues, and special rewards, probably depending on where you place towards the end of each respective season. A type of endless dungeon mode targeted towards endgame players with scaling difficulties and rewards dependent on where and how far you've made it. I think this is a fun idea, but at the same time isn't one that I'd ever really participate in. Mobile games have this feature. It is very common in gacha games, and I tend to avoid it there as well. A player-driven economy, which is always fantastic during the healthy launch of a game, but when the player base dries up, it ends up ultimately becoming more of a hindrance than anything else. A marketplace, which is also a great addition to the game that will largely benefit players in the short term, but become relatively useless in the long term. Improved evolving for Spherix, a dynamic open world, Spherix writing, which I think is one of the features that we desperately need. Large open worlds can be a little bit tedious to navigate on foot, so writing on land or in the air is important for players to traverse the world without too much difficulty. And per character personalization, I'm assuming that this is concerning outfits, concerning customization options. Overall, Spherix looks like it is taking the Palworld formula and MMOizing it to a degree, which I think is a great direction for a game. I would have loved more MMOS gameplay in Palworld. It is quite the daunting task, no doubt, and I genuinely wish them the best of luck with it. It's not going to be easy, especially given the comparisons that are going to be drawn to Palworld and the expectations that are going to be in place as a direct result of the similarities between both respective games. But as Palworld proved, as Genshin Impact proved, just because you share similarities to another pre-existing intellectual property does not mean you cannot exceed them. Or at the very least, establish yourself, establish your own identity alongside them. Now, if Spherix is not an MMO you're all interested in, absolutely no problem. I got you covered with 2 different videos on screen right now that might be more up your alley.